Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Monday, March 1st, and I'm Blair Kirkland. Kansas picked up its best victory of the season on Saturday, defeating second-ranked Baylor 71-58 and handing the Bears their first loss of the season. KU played great, especially senior guard Marcus Garrett on senior night and big man David McCormack. And Baylor certainly continued to feel the impact of having not played for 3 weeks in February while dealing with COVID-19 issues. What does the victory mean for Kansas going forward? On today's show, we get the answers from beat writers Jesse Newell and Gary Bedore. We talk about what remains on the KU schedule, speculate on Big 12 and NCAA Tournament seeding, and much more. So let's get started talking with Gary and Jesse. Jesse Newell and Gary Bedore here. We're going to talk Kansas basketball. The Jayhawks coming off the 71-58 victory over second-ranked Baylor, handed the Bears their first loss of the season. Gary, you were in Allen Fieldhouse. I'm just wondering, what did it feel any different than other home games for KU this year? Because just watching it on TV, it seemed like there was great energy in the building, even though there were only a couple thousand fans there.
Yeah, I think the students for a couple games now, since they came back to town on February 1st, have done a pretty good job. They're in both end zones, and they're all sitting together. There must be a rule about groups can sit together or something, but they make a lot of noise, and they were fired up for Garrett because with all the senior night stuff before the game, they were back to their old energy levels, cheering and stuff. And then in the game, you could tell that the team was playing really hard and wanted to gain revenge on Baylor, or maybe give them their first loss of the year. So the crowd was into it. It was definitely the loudest of the year.
I was also struck by the Kansas broke out the Reds, uniforms. And so you had the Christmas special there, the red versus the green on on TV. I thought it looked good. Jesse, there were so many keys to this game, but maybe the first thing to talk about in terms of just how to break it down is the play of Marcus Garrett, who Gary said was recognized on senior night there, and his I'm probably going to refer to energy several times in our conversation, but he seemed to just play with a extra zip, and in his defense on Jared, at least first ball defense on Jared Butler was, I thought, outstanding.
Yeah, it was. He was, as Bill Self, his term is turned up. Marcus was ready to play that game, was doing it in front of some family. So it's just interesting because for most of the season, it seems like Bill Self has kind of tried to figure out ways to keep Marcus fresh. There's that weird illness he had early in the season. There was a time where Bill Self talked about how there were times where Marcus would struggle to catch his breath and would have to come out of the game. So this is just it's not his fault, but he's not Devon Dotson, who could play 40 minutes. He's not Devontae Graham, who played 40 minutes for like 9 straight games for Kansas during his senior year and never come off the court. And Bill Self will play those guys all 40 minutes if their bodies allow it, but this is just a little bit different. They've been trying to get a fresh version of Marcus for most of the season, and it's been a struggle. And then against Baylor, as you said, he was just lighting up Jared Butler. I noticed there were a few instances too where KU usually switches everything. They kind of communicate the guard to guard screens, but there were a couple of times where Jared Butler kind of brushed off of a guard to guard screen, and Marcus said, "No, I'm not really leaving you." So it was kind of a mano-a-mano thing on this one, and Marcus took it pretty personally, and Jared did not get much going. He had averaged 23 points in 5 games previously against Kansas. He had just lit KU up, and it was not to be on that Saturday game when Jared Butler only has 5. So Baylor as a whole looked different as a team, not quite as, we'll use the word energized. They didn't look like themselves, obviously, after this COVID pause. But, Marcus Garrett, if he can bring that sort of enthusiasm, effort, and not only on the defensive end, on the offensive end as well, then it kind of changes the complexion of this Kansas team.
Yeah, I like that you pointed out the play at the end of the first half where he went hard to the basket and went up with the left hand. Just the type of blow-by layup that we saw from him last year, but we haven't seen much of this year. That to me, his defense is always going to be there, but the offense hasn't been there for him, and getting to the basket hasn't been there for him, and that was an encouraging sign to see that ability.
Yeah, and Bill Self for so long. I mean, you think about back to all the great point guards they've had. He loves just late shot clock, setting a high ball screen and letting Frank Mason or Tyshawn Taylor or Devon Dotson or Sharon Collins just letting them go to work. And part of the reason for KU's offensive struggles this year is they don't have that guy. They can't just put it in somebody's hands and say, hey, go get a bucket. They've tried that at times late game. And I remember like the Oklahoma State game in particular, it wasn't wholly Marcus Garrett's fault because some of the spacing issues that were there and KU misran a play. But, he got blocked at the rim and Oklahoma State comes back and makes a three and they end up winning the game. So there have been those instances this year where it's just easy things in the past have not been quite as easy. And a lot of that's been because Marcus Garrett's not this kind of penetrator that a lot of the other guys were. I mean, that's not his fault. It's just kind of a reality. But yeah, we all saw more of that against Baylor. And so if there's more of that in the tank when it comes to the NCAA tournament, then KU might be a little bit better than we all think.
Gary, how about the game of David McCormack and just how he's just changed over the last, I don't know, however many weeks it's been. They're just getting so much more production out of David McCormack.
Yeah, he came out and was great right off the bat, and 20 points, 3 rebounds or so. He's not rebounding, but he's given them the offense they need. And now you got to wonder if he'll be first or second team all league maybe, because he's playing really well and he really had a good game and played hard. He's one of the reasons they were able to have so much energy that game. He obviously wanted it for Garrett and the other reasons. They'd never been swept they'd never lost back-to-back seasons to a team in the Bill Self era at Allen. So Baylor would have won 2 years in a row there, and they were favored to do so. So McCormack and the team had a lot to protect. And they after going 16-0 against Baylor throughout history, they would have lost 2 in a row to them in Allen. They were 16-0 and in Allen against Baylor until last year. So McCormack he's starting to play really well. And if he sticks around, which he should, but you never know in this day and age, you would think he would have a really, really good senior year.
Yeah, kind of fulfilling the prophecy that Bill Self had for him in the preseason. Remember how he was one of you guys probably asked Bill who he thought his leading scorer was going to be. I think that's a question Bill likes getting in the preseason. He always likes to, project who his leading scorer. And he said David McCormack, and it was not that way for quite a while. I haven't seen the stats. I couldn't tell you. Maybe it's Jalen Wilson. I couldn't tell you who it's Abaji, I'm sure, right? Their scoring leader. But McCormack has just been playing really well on the offensive end for a while. And Jesse, Gary mentioned it that KU was an underdog at home. I think you researched this for the first time since maybe the Roy Williams first season.
Yeah, crazy. You think about Bill Self now is in his 18th season, and Roy Williams spent 15 at Kansas. And KU, at least according to team rankings, they kind of tried to go back and do some research. It's not all in their database, but they do rankings, like basically team strength rankings. And we're trying to go back and figure out the last time that KU would have been an underdog at home. And it would have, what they figured was that it was probably placing number 1 Oklahoma in 1989. And so that thing kind of made its way around the internet. I mean, people are some of these things coming to an end this year are sort of mind-boggling. You talk about the 231 straight weeks in the AP poll before KU was out for 1 week. I mean, that's crazy. It was a streak that spanned further than iPads. It was started before iPads existed. We can't really imagine our lives now without technology like that. And then, the 38-year senior night streak continued for Kansas. So that's a feather in their cap. But this one, I mean, to think in 32 years, you were not an underdog at home one time. That's really hard to do. I mean, you people, Allen Fieldhouse gives them a nice advantage, but it's not like it gives them a 20-point advantage. It gives them about a 3 or a 4-point advantage, but like most teams out there. So for Kansas to go 3 decades without playing a game at Allen Fieldhouse, where Vegas odds makers said that KU was less than a 50% chance to win, that says quite a bit about Roy Williams. It says quite a bit about Bill Self. It says quite a bit about the players, and obviously the program not ever taking those dips like many of those other blue bloods have.
Yeah, look, in a Big 8 and Big 12 that's included some great teams, great players, other Final Four teams and All-America type players. And for the odds making is, it's for our purposes. Jesse, I know that you dabble in the in the trade, but for me it's perception, right? It's about perception, just like polls, betting lines. If Kansas is an underdog, that means that the general thought is that Baylor is the better team, and for I don't know. I think Kansas, that piece of information probably filtered into the Kansas locker room at some point this week as well. And even after the Texas game, when they lost the heartbreaker on Tuesday in overtime at Texas, I was listening to the post-game show, and it's almost as if the upcoming Baylor game was every bit as important, or even foremost in the Kansas thoughts, as the game that they had just played. I kept hearing people talking to players who were interviewed and coaches interviewed after the game were talking about the Baylor game. So Kansas poured a lot into this, and I'll tell you what, we can't talk about the game without mentioning, Jesse, you referred to it earlier, but Baylor playing its second game since a 21-day layoff because of COVID. And I've heard coaches in college basketball say there's a fatigue. It takes teams who have had the layoff a few games to just get the fatigue factor out. And I think Kansas was able to take advantage of a Baylor team that was not in great game shape. And we saw it earlier in the week when the Bears just got past an Iowa State team. I think it was on that same Tuesday night that Kansas played, that Baylor had struggled to get by an Iowa State team that has 2 wins on the season. So it was a good time for Kansas to play Baylor. And I'm not saying Kansas wouldn't have won the game if Baylor had not had the 3-week layoff, but Baylor had the 3-week layoff.
Yeah, Jordan Sperber is a college basketball analyst. He kind of studied this. The teams that have come back from 2 and 3 week layoffs have not done well when they've come back, and it makes sense. They've really not done as well as you would expect based off of the polls and everything. It seemed like the first game against Iowa State that Iowa State shot pretty well, and so maybe that maybe it masked a little bit that Baylor played okay. But yeah. Gary can maybe speak more to it, but there was just a lack of energy. And the thing you're going to get from Baylor always is offensive rebounding and guys just hustling and scrapping. And this is a bad thing to say, but Baylor made Kansas look athletic. And Kansas has not looked athletic against many teams this year. I mean, Bill Self has griped about, rightfully so, this team is not the most athletic he's ever had. They don't have the guy that's playing above the rim like a Josh Jackson or an Andrew Wiggins, those sorts of things. KU looked athletic on Saturday, and I think that has to be attributed to, I guess Jeff Goodman was saying on one of his podcasts that it was, his reporting was that there were 8 guys that had COVID in that 3-week span, 8 players for Baylor.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that would be a lot to make up, and obviously you lose your conditioning and the practice time as well. And so Scott Drew mentioned that in the post game, didn't use as a crutch as an excuse, but it's a reality. And I can definitely see where KU kind of looked like a team that was in week 15 in the NFL season, and Baylor looked like a team that was just right off the preseason starting week 1.
So 3-point shooting too, Gary. I saw Baylor came into the game at like 43% or something as a team, and that was off on Saturday.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if Butler wasn't one of the guys that had COVID, because even though Garrett was all over him, I didn't even notice Butler, until he finally hit a layup for his first bucket with 10 minutes left.
Wow.
I mean, maybe it was just Garrett with the greatest individual defensive performance in KU history, but Butler, I mean, I have no idea, but I heard that about them maybe having 8 guys also, and it would be amazingly tough to be ready to play after being off 2 or 3 weeks. If you look at KU, when they went home over Christmas, they were 8-1, I believe, and they were ranked in the top 5, and Texas came in and just murdered them, which turned out to be KU's only loss in the Fieldhouse this year, unless they lose to UTEP. But that Butler again. Although in the post game I watched that too. Scott Drew did credit Garrett and blamed Scott Drew blamed himself too, saying he needs to do some things that might have freed him a little bit. So Marcus Garrett, I guess, had a senior night he will never, ever, ever forget, because beating number 2 and shutting down Butler, whether he was in shape, out of shape, or whatever. But you do have to feel sorry for Baylor. I know KU fans don't want to hear any excuses, but like Jesse said, Drew wasn't, he answers the questions just like Bill Self does. And finally the questions got out if they had fatigue, and he's not going to lie. Yeah, they had fatigue. They've only had 2 games since being out 20 days. And he, like Drew said, they couldn't practice, a lot of the guys, a ton of the guys, if they had up to 8 out, according to Goodman or whoever reported that. So I do feel for Baylor, but as you know, sometimes it's not so bad to get a loss. Now, you want to go undefeated and set the records and be the first team since Indiana, but a loss a lot of times before the NCAA tournament isn't a bad thing.
Wakes you up a little bit. I'm going to submit that the greatest defensive performance I've seen by an individual in the Fieldhouse was, I want to say it was 1995, when Greg Ostertag held Bryant Reeves to zero points. Now, Randy Rutherford scored 45, but Big Country only goose egg that day. And, of course, he went on to lead Oklahoma State to the Final Four that year. And, look, it doesn't get any easier for Baylor at West Virginia. Well, I think on Tuesday, the first of 3 games this week, so Baylor can get up to 14 games to finish out the regular season. And so it's going to be a tough week for Baylor. Okay, let's take a break here. And when we come back, we'll have more from Jesse Newell and Gary Bedore. Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening. We're back with Gary Bedore and Jesse Newell, who cover KU for Kansas City Star and the Wichita Eagle. So let's big picture this and what this means for Kansas in terms of how we look at them going into the Big 12 tournament and the NCAA tournament. And quite frankly, the Big 12 tournament, I don't even know if they should be playing it, but it's going to be played. It's going to be competitive. A lot of NCAA tournament bound teams are going to be in Kansas City the following week. Of course, before that, Gary, there's a regular season game to play.
Yeah, and Thursday night, 7 p.m., KU plays UTEP, and UTEP seems like it's another one of those decent teams that they play non-con. They've won 4 in a row. In Conference USA, they play back-to-back. So they beat Charlotte back-to-back last weekend, but they have the nephew of Chiefs offensive coordinator, Bieniemy, who played for OU, and one game against KU, he had 8 assists, and Bieniemy's OU team beat KU in that game. So obviously KU should win, but it's another team that they also have a guy who shot 20 or 25 free throws last game and made almost all of them. He's a guard and he's good. So once again, they can't sleepwalk as they showed against North Dakota State. But they play UTEP on Thursday. UTEP's 12-10, by the way. And then the Big 12 tournament.
It's kind of folly right now, Jesse, isn't it, to project where Kansas would be in a seeding because there are just so many Big 12 games remaining this week. There's going to be a ton of Big 12 games as the league has to make up as many of the COVID lost games as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bill Self, this is like his best hobby here is trying to figure out where his team seating is. It like takes over his mind this time of year. But, 3 is probably a good guess. It's going to be really tough Baylor won't lose that many games, you wouldn't think, to catch up. But probably the 2 seed between West Virginia and Kansas is what's most likely. And so we'll see how West Virginia does this week. But you mentioned it, Blair. It's sort of like this could be a really fun Big 12 tournament because if Baylor's just a tick off, I think you really have 6 Big 12 teams that are, to me, are like all the same. Like Texas and Texas Tech and Oklahoma and Kansas and Oklahoma State and West Virginia, like they are all just like the same quality level of team where all those teams, if they face each other, would probably be within about 2 or 3 points. So it really sets up potentially, that you get the quarterfinal round and you get, again, TCU against like Baylor. That's probably not going to be a good game if Baylor's full strength. But every other game there, it could be like a Texas Tech, a West Virginia, Oklahoma State, a Kansas, Oklahoma, and that would be the quarterfinal round. And then those teams that would win would all face each other in the semis, and all of a sudden you've got, a Baylor, Oklahoma, and a Kansas, West Virginia or something. It could be, this could really be one of the most competitive tournaments, just game to game, close games, overtimes, that sort of thing. So it really is too bad that this isn't kind of a normal year where fans would all be allowed in, the full capacity, because this might be more entertaining than any other year. It's just one of those things, it's going to be limited capacity and maybe people aren't paying as much attention as they would in previous years. But I'm actually really looking forward to it because, like I said, that quarterfinal round could be 4 great games and maybe just 3 if Baylor gets back to itself. But if Baylor's not back to itself, then all of a sudden you're looking and you're saying that's a lot of good games.
Yeah, 20% capacity at T-Mobile Center next week which is about 4,000 fans or so will be allowed in, and schools have to take care of their family and the players' families and staff and all that. So there will not be many fans in the building in Kansas City for the Big 12 tournament. So how about the NCAA tournament? Certainly Kansas is building credentials, and I don't think the selection committee, when they consider Kansas, is going to take into account that Baylor was coming off the COVID spread. I think Kansas is, at least what I'm seeing in the mock bracketing, moving up the charts. No worse than a 5, probably a 4, and could be as high as a 3 when it's all said and done.
Yeah, we talked about the article I wrote, Blair, a couple weeks ago about the wins above bubble, kind of using the resume measures that sometimes kind of pretty closely follow what the NCAA does. They kind of try to have the baby a little bit more, using the quote best measures and the most deserving ones. But if you're looking most deserving, KU's kind of done what KU does. They have racked up a bunch of quality victories, and they're 11th in wins above bubble right now. So that would put them as a 3 seed. So yeah, potentially with what happens against UTEP in the Big 12 tournament, if you have a strong finish, if KU won out, I think they're a 3 seed. But right now, probably a 4. You said maybe the 5 line at this moment, but KU, this has sort of happened in recent years where, Bill Self always credited his schedule maker, Larry Keating, but it's true. They were sort of taking advantage of the system that was in place, and they would get these very good, high quality wins and boost up their resume. And that sort of happened this year. KU's played a lot of tough opponents, but they don't have any, quote, bad losses, and they have racked up a lot of good wins because they played a lot of good teams. So that's going to help them when it comes to the bracket selection process. And they're probably, to be completely honest with you, if you're looking at the predictive numbers that I do, KU's somewhere around 15th to 20th in most of those. So they're likely to be like they are most seasons, probably going to be overseeded by about one seed based off of resume. And that's kind of the MO that KU has.
Okay. Hey, before we get out of here, let's mention that, Gary, there was a piece of news that we learned on Saturday that Lavinia Squires had passed away, a former Kansas basketball player. Didn't score many points for the Jayhawks, but was significant in another very important way. Tell us about Lavinia Squires.
He was the first black player at KU brought in by Fog Allen. I believe he and the man at K-State came in at the same time. So they both were the first in the Big Seven. But as Bill Self said, without Squires paving the way, Chamberlain probably would never have come to KU. But in the business world, Lavinia Squires was a great success. He lived in California and didn't come back to KU much, if at all, during the reunions. Probably just a quiet guy, but from everybody's accounts throughout history, he was a great man, and went to Wichita East, I believe, and played for Ralph Miller and was all-state at Wichita East. So
Ralph Miller,
they honored him a lot at the game, the past game. So the crowd was very respectful, and they had a couple of videos and stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned Ralph Miller, former Kansas All-America, and coach, ended up winning, I think over close to 700 games as a Division I head coach. And the Kansas State player that you mentioned, Gene Wilson was his name, broke the color barrier at K-State when it came to basketball. So, didn't play in many games, certainly didn't score many points, but was a very significant figure in Kansas basketball history. And Gary, just remind us, there just not many players left from the 52 national championship team, are there?
No, I don't believe so. A lot of those guys lived in Lawrence in their later years, but have passed away. Bill Linhard is here in town, and I believe Bill is the only person on the team living at this time. I'd have to make sure, but they're all from a great generation, and they're all really would be in their 80s and 90s. So 52 is a long time ago.
Yeah, it is. Someday you and I will have to talk about that 52 season, that 52 team, and how Fog Allen went about recruiting for that team, and used not just the prospect of winning the NCAA championship, but also the Olympic gold medal in 1952 as a recruiting enticement for those guys. So, Jesse, Gary, always great catching up. Thank you guys, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production staff of Derek Donovan, Beth Welsh, Monty Davis, Jeff Rosen, Chris Fickett, and Savannah Smith. A tip of the cap to Jesse Newell and Gary Bedore for stopping by and talking KU basketball. Links to their stories about the Baylor game and other KU sports stories can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Hey, we have another deal for you. For a limited time, you can subscribe to Sports Pass, that's the Kansas City Star sports section online, for 99 cents a month. That's right, 99 pennies a month. After 3 months, it auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless you cancel. And what a time to subscribe. The Royals are at spring training. March Madness is right around the corner. And of course, it's never not Chiefs season. So how do you get it? You go to kansascity.com/SportsPass2020. That is kansascity.com/SportsPass2020. Do you want more than just sports coverage? Check out the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports, news, features, commentary, and analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus additional national news, sports, and business coverage with the e-edition. The details for all of these deals can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And if you're having trouble hunting down any of these offers, just send me an email at bkirchhoff@kcstar.com and I will get you to the right place. So whether it's the sports pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Tuesday with another episode.